I fell in love with a man who was already planning his own funeral. And the worst part is, I'm the one who helped him pick out the music. I know how that sounds. It sounds dark, maybe even a little crazy. But for 3 months, I lived a lifetime with someone who knew his clock was ticking while I was still trying to figure out how to wake up in the morning. I sat in the front row of a church that didn't even know his real story, listening to the songs we had chosen together while he was still warm and laughing in my arms. I never told my parents about him. I never told my friends. I kept him like a secret prayer, a hidden treasure I was afraid the world would steal if I spoke his name aloud. But today, the silence is too heavy. Today, I think I'm finally ready to tell you why I would do it all over again, even knowing how it ends. Before I take you into the days that changed my life forever, if you believe that every love story, no matter how short or how painful, is worth telling, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Sharing these stories is how we keep these memories alive. Now, let's go back to that grey, rainy Tuesday where it all began. Before I met Elias, my life was a series of check boxes. I grew up in a house where the future was the only thing that mattered. My father always told me that today is just a bridge to tomorrow, and I believed him. I went to the right schools, I got the right grades, and I applied for the right jobs. But by the time I turned 24, I felt like I was drowning in my own expectations. I was living in a tiny apartment with walls so thin I could hear my neighbour's clock ticking, and every tick felt like a reminder that I was running out of time to become someone. It started on a Tuesday. In my life, Tuesdays were always the worst. They aren't as hopeful as Mondays and not as close to the weekend as Wednesdays. They are just there. I was sitting in the back of a crowded city bus, staring at my reflection in the window and hating what I saw. I had just come from a job interview for a junior accounting position, a job I didn't even want, at a company that felt like a grey box. The interviewer had looked at me through his thick glasses as if I were a piece of office furniture he didn't have room for. He didn't ask about my passions or my dreams. He asked about my proficiency in spreadsheets. I walked out of that building feeling like a ghost. The rain was streaking across the bus glass, blurring the neon signs of the city into long, bleeding lines of light. I felt like I was dissolving. I was crying, but it wasn't the dramatic kind of crying you see in movies. It was that quiet, pathetic leaking from the eyes that you try to hide by looking away. I felt invisible. I felt like if I disappeared right then, the bus would keep moving, the rain would keep falling, and no one would even notice the empty seat. I was just another face in a sea of commuters, all of us heading toward futures we weren't sure we wanted. Then, a hand reached over from the seat behind me. It was a pale hand with long, thin fingers and a small scar across the thumb. It dropped a folded piece of yellow paper into my lap. I froze. My first thought was that it was trash, or maybe a prank from one of the teenagers at the back. I didn't want to look up. I didn't want anyone to see my blotchy face or the mascara running down my cheeks. But curiosity is a strange thing. It survives even when hope doesn't. I opened the paper. It was a sketch. It was messy, drawn with a cheap black ballpoint pen on the back of a grocery receipt. But it was me. It captured the exact way my hair was frizzing from the humidity and the way I was biting my lip. But the artist had added one thing: a tiny, ridiculous, sparkling crown sitting crooked on my head. Underneath the drawing, in shaky but elegant handwriting, it said, "Queens shouldn't cry on public transport. It lowers the property value of the whole city." I let out a wet, accidental laugh that sounded more like a bark. I spun around, ready to be annoyed, and there he was. He wasn't what I expected. He wasn't some polished guy trying to pick me up with a clever line. He had messy, dark hair that looked like he'd been running his hands through it all day in a fit of frustration. He wore a denim jacket that was frayed at the cuffs and a scarf that looked like it had been knitted by someone who didn't quite know how to knit. But his eyes, they were a deep, startling amber, like honey held up to a flame. They looked like they had seen everything in the world, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and decided that the only reasonable response was to keep smiling. He didn't say a word. He didn't ask for my name. He didn't ask why I was crying. He just gave me a small two-finger salute, stood up, and disappeared off the bus at the next stop, his boots splashing into a puddle as the doors hissed shut. I sat there holding that yellow paper like it was a winning lottery ticket, feeling the first spark of warmth I had felt in months. For the next week, I found myself taking that same bus at the same time. I told myself I wasn't looking for him. I told myself I was just being consistent with my schedule, like I always was. But my heart would jump every time the doors opened. On Friday, there he was again, sitting in the very back, staring out the window with a sketchbook balanced on his knees. When I sat down in front of him, he didn't hand me a note this time. He just leaned forward and whispered, "You forgot your crown today, Clara." I spun around so fast I nearly hit my head on the seat. "How do you know my name?" He pointed to the wooden keychain hanging off my bag, a little hand-carved C my sister had made for me when we were kids. "I'm a detective," he joked, his voice low and raspy. "Or I just know how to read. I'm Elias, by the way. And for the record, you look much better when you're not trying to blend into the upholstery." That was the beginning of us. We started meeting at that bus stop every single day. At first, it was just 10 minutes of talking while the bus hummed beneath our feet. He told me he was an artist, but not the kind that sold paintings in galleries. He said he was a documentarian of the overlooked. He drew the things people usually ignored, the way weeds grew through the cracks in the sidewalk, the expression on an old man's face when he fed birds, the way the light changed color right before a storm. One day the bus was late. It was one of those humid afternoons where the air feels like a wet blanket. Elias looked at me and said, "Do you actually have to be anywhere, Clara? Or are you just heading home because that's what the clock says you should do?" I hesitated. I had a list of chores. I had a dinner to prep. I had a future to plan. I have things to do, I said. "The things will be there tomorrow," he said, standing up and slinging his bag over his shoulder. "But the light in the park is doing something incredible right now. Come with me." I went. And for the first time in 24 years, I didn't check my watch once. Elias was the most frustrating man I had ever met because he simply refused to acknowledge the concept of a schedule. My entire life was built on a foundation of someday. I was saving money for someday. I was waiting to be happy for someday. But Elias lived as if the word tomorrow were a foreign language he refused to learn. He'd make me stop in the middle of a busy sidewalk with people huffing and bumping into us just to look at the way the light hit a puddle of oil on the road. "Look at that, Clara," he'd whisper, pointing at the swirling iridescent blues and pinks in the grime. "It's like a galaxy trapped in the mud. Most people just see the dirt. They miss the universe." He'd spend an hour sitting on a curb talking to a stray cat, asking it about its day and sharing his tuna sandwich. He once made me stay in a park until 2 a.m., long after the streetlights had flickered on, just to see the exact moment the moon went behind a specific branch of an old oak tree. I was shivering, tired, and worried about work the next morning, but when the moon finally hit that spot, turning the leaves into silver fire, I forgot to be cold. "You're always looking at the horizon, Clara," he told me that night. We were sitting on a rusted park bench, sharing a bag of donuts that were slightly stale but tasted like heaven. "You're so busy looking for the sun to rise that you're missing the stars that are out right now. The stars are much more interesting. They've traveled billions of miles across time just to be seen by you in this very second. And you're ignoring them to look at a sun that's going to be there every single morning like a boring appointment." "The sun is reliable," I argued, though my heart wasn't in it. "The sun is the future. You can't build a life on stars, Elias. They disappear." "The sun is a deadline," he countered with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "The stars are a gift. and everything disappears eventually, Clara. That's what makes it beautiful. I fell for him because he made me feel brave. For the first time in my life, I felt like a person, not a set of tasks to be completed. Because of him, I went back to that grey accounting office and quit. I didn't have a backup plan. I didn't have a someday anymore. I pulled my old canvases out of the closet, the ones my father had told me were a distraction, and I started painting again. I painted the city, but I painted it the way Elias saw it, full of hidden gold, secret galaxies in puddles, and people wearing invisible crowns. I felt like I was finally waking up from a 24-year sleep. We spent every moment together. We'd take the train to the end of the line just to see what was there. We'd spend hours in used bookstores, reading the first lines of random novels and guessing the endings. I felt invincible. I felt like as long as I was with him, the real world couldn't touch me. But as the weeks turned into months, I started noticing the cracks in the magic. Elias would get tired easily. We'd be walking, laughing about something stupid, and suddenly he'd have to sit down on a low wall, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. His face would go a ghostly shade of grey, and his hands would shake as he tried to open a water bottle. He'd always laugh it off, saying he was just out of shape, or that the city air was getting to him. He was only 27, but sometimes, when he thought I wasn't looking, he looked 100 years old. He never invited me to his apartment. We always stayed at mine, or we wandered the streets until our feet ached. He never talked about what we'd do in the winter, or where we'd go for my birthday in 6 months. Whenever I brought up the future, simple things, like a concert in December or a trip in the spring, he'd gently steer the conversation back to right now. Tell me what you're thinking about this donut, Clara. Right now, in this second. Describe the sugar. The world came crashing down on a Friday night in October. The air was crisp, smelling of wood smoke and damp leaves. We were at a small second-run movie theatre, watching an old black-and-white film about two lovers lost in Paris. Elias had fallen asleep about 20 minutes in, something he was doing more and more often lately. His head was resting on my shoulder, his breathing heavy and uneven. His denim jacket slipped off the back of his chair, and as I reached down into the sticky darkness to pick it up, a small, orange plastic bottle rolled out of the pocket and clattered against the floor. I picked it up. I wasn't trying to be a spy. I honestly thought it was just aspirin or something for a headache. But the name on the label was long, complicated, and looked like a chemical formula. Under the dim, flickering light of the movie screen, while a French actress laughed on the screen, I pulled out my phone and typed the name into a search engine. My heart didn't just break. It stopped. It felt like my blood had turned into liquid nitrogen, freezing me from the inside out. The search results didn't talk about treatment or recovery or getting better. They talked about palliative care. They talked about managing the final stages of systemic failure. They talked about the end. I looked at him, this boy who taught me to look at stars. This boy who drew crowns on crying girls. This boy who was currently drooling slightly on my sweater. And I realized I was looking at a person who was already halfway out the door. He wasn't living in the now because he was a philosopher. He was living in the now because he didn't have a later. I didn't wait for the movie to end. I grabbed his arm, woke him up with a start, and dragged him out of the theatre into the parking lot. The autumn air was cold and the rain had started again, turning the pavement into a dark, oil-slicked mirror. I stood there, clutching that orange bottle in my shaking hand, and I screamed at him. "How could you?" I sobbed, the words tearing at my throat. "How could you let me love you? How could you be so selfish?" I told him he was a liar. I told him he had tricked me into a world that was about to disappear. I felt like every beautiful moment we had shared, every walk, every laugh, every kiss, was just a distraction he used to hide his own tragedy. I felt like I was a character in a story he was writing just so he wouldn't have to die alone. I felt like he had stolen my heart only to leave it in a graveyard. Elias didn't scream back. He didn't even try to defend himself. He just stood there in the rain, his thin jacket soaking through, and he looked at me with that same amber-eyed peace that I now realized was actually a profound, exhausted acceptance. "I wasn't looking for a miracle, Clara," he said, his voice so quiet it was almost lost in the wind. "I've known the ending of my story for a long time. I spent years being angry. I spent years looking at the horizon, just like you, waiting for the dark to come. I stopped drawing. I stopped talking to stray cats. I was just waiting to disappear." He took a step closer, his breath visible in the cold air like a dying ghost. "And then I saw you on that bus. You were crying, and you looked like you were disappearing too. And for the first time in years, I didn't want to look at the horizon anymore. I wanted to look at you. I wanted to see if I could make one person look at the stars again before I went to join them." He reached out, his hand trembling, and touched my cheek. "Is it selfish to want to see the sun one last time before it goes down? I didn't want a nurse or a doctor to be the last thing I saw in this life. I wanted a girl with a crooked crown. I didn't trick you into loving me, Clara. I invited you to live with me. There's a difference. We lived more in these 3 months than some people live in 80 years. Isn't that worth something?" I wanted to hate him. I tried so hard to stay angry because anger is a solid thing you can hold on to, while grief is a fog that swallows you whole. But as I looked at him, I realized he was the one who was losing everything. He was the one who wouldn't see the next spring. He was the one who had to say goodbye to the universe. And yet, here he was, in the middle of a rainy parking lot, trying to comfort me. I went home with him that night. His apartment was exactly what I expected. Small, drafty, and filled with books, half-finished sketches, and the smell of turpentine and old paper. And there on his bedside table was a stack of yellow paper and a black ballpoint pen. He had been drawing me every single night. The next 3 weeks were the hardest and most beautiful of my life. I didn't go back to my apartment. I didn't care about my bills or my chores. I stayed with him. I watched the boy who taught me how to walk slowly become a boy who couldn't walk at all. We didn't talk about the horizon anymore. We talked about the texture of the blankets, the exact taste of the peppermint tea, and the way the rain sounded different when it hit the glass versus when it hit the metal fire escape. I became his hands. I helped him draw when his fingers became too stiff. I read to him when his eyes became too tired. We lived in a bubble where time was measured in breaths, not hours. One afternoon he was lying on the sofa, his head in my lap. The sun was setting, casting a long orange glow across the room. He looked so fragile, like he was made of spun glass. He handed me his phone and said, "We need to finish the playlist, Clara. My exit music, the songs for the church." I tried to swallow the lump in my throat, but it felt like a stone. "I don't want to pick funeral music, Elias. I don't want to think about a church without you in it." "It's not funeral music," he insisted, a flash of his old amber spark in his eyes. "It's the soundtrack for the credits. You can't have a great movie without a great song at the end. It's the last thing people hear before they walk out into the light and start their own stories. Help me pick the songs that feel like us, not the sad stuff, the stuff that feels like the bus rides." So we spent hours doing it. We picked a jazz song for the first day on the bus. We picked a loud, messy rock song for the night we stayed in the park until 2 a.m. We picked a quiet piano melody for the rainy nights at his apartment. We laughed about some of them, and we cried over others. And then he picked one song that he wouldn't let me hear. "This one is for you," he said, locking the phone with a weak thumb. "You can only play it when the screen goes black. Promise me, Clara. Not before." I promised. I would have promised him the moon if he had asked. In those final days, I realized that I had spent my entire life being wrong about love. I used to think that love was something you built to last forever, like a house or a monument. I thought the value of a relationship was measured in its duration, in years, in decades, in silver and gold anniversaries. But Elias taught me that love isn't a building. It's a spark. It's a flash of lightning in a dark sky. It doesn't matter if it burns for a century or a second, the light it gives off is the same. He wasn't selfish for loving me. He was the bravest person I had ever known. He knew he was going to lose, he knew the house was going to burn down, and he decided to walk inside and dance with me anyway. He showed me that the end doesn't take away the beauty of the beginning. It's the end that makes the beginning mean something. A story isn't beautiful because it goes on forever. It's beautiful because of what happened while the pages were turning. Elias passed away on a Tuesday. Of course it was a Tuesday. It was grey, it was rainy, and it was just there. The service was small. His family was there. Kind, quiet people who thanked me for making his last months vibrant. They told me they hadn't seen him smile like that in years. I sat in the front row, clutching my purse, feeling like an imposter. They knew Elias the son, Elias the brother, the boy who had been sick for a long time. But they didn't know the Elias who saw crowns on crying girls. They didn't know the Elias who loved the stars because they were a gift, not a deadline. They didn't know the man who taught me how to live. As the service ended, the music started. It was the playlist, the jazz, the rock, the piano. I stood there, and for the first time since that night in the parking lot, I didn't feel like I was dissolving. I felt solid. I felt heavy with the weight of him, but it was a good weight. I felt like the crown he drew for me was finally sitting straight on my head. When I got home to my empty apartment, the silence was deafening. I sat on the floor, surrounded by my half-finished paintings of the city, and I opened the playlist on my own phone. I scrolled to the very bottom to the song he had hidden from me. I hit play. It wasn't a sad song. It wasn't a funeral dirge. It was a beautiful, soaring melody, the kind of song that makes you want to run toward the horizon, not away from it. And then I heard his voice. He had recorded a small memo at the beginning of the track, probably while I was in the kitchen making tea. Clara, his voice sounded thin but steady, full of that amber light. If you're hearing this, it means the stars have gone down and the sun is coming up. Don't hate the sun, okay? It's a new day, and you have a lot of painting to do. You're a queen, Clara. Don't ever let the city or the clocks tell you otherwise. Thank you for being my right now. Now go find yours. My life is different now. I still have that yellow paper. I framed it and hung it in my studio, right above where I paint. Every time I start to get lost in someday, every time I start to worry about a future I can't control or a schedule I'm failing to keep, I look at that crooked little crown. It reminds me that I am alive, right now, in this second. People ask me if I regret it. They see the way my eyes get misty when I see a blue bus or hear a certain jazz melody, and they ask if I would have stayed on that bus if I knew how much it would hurt to say goodbye. They think the pain of the end cancels out the joy of the beginning, and I tell them the truth. I would have missed 1,000 job interviews. I would have walked 1,000,000 miles in the rain. I would have let my heart be broken into 1,000,000 pieces just to have those 3 months. Because I'd rather have a heart that is scarred and bruised from truly living than a heart that is pristine because it was always kept in a box waiting for a someday that never comes. Love isn't about how much time you have. It's about what you do with the time you've been given. Elias didn't give me a future. He gave me something much better. He gave me the present. He taught me that we are all just travelers, catching a ride on a bus that's going to stop eventually. The trick isn't to try and stay on the bus forever. The trick is to make sure you're looking at the stars while you're on it. I'm sharing my heart with you today because Elias taught me that our moments, no matter how small or how brief, are the only things that truly belong to us. If my story touched you, or if it reminded you to hold someone a little tighter today, please leave a like so I know I'm not alone in this. And if you're still here with me at the very end, please leave a comment with the word stars. It lets me know that you really listen to him, and it makes the world feel a little less empty. If you've ever loved someone you knew you were going to lose, or if someone changed your whole world in just a few short months, please tell me about them in the comments. I want this to be a place where our hearts can meet, where no story is too painful or too small to matter. If you want to walk through more of these deep, emotional journeys with me, I'd love for you to subscribe and stay a while. Thank you for listening to my truth. And please, for Elias, don't forget to look at the stars tonight.